now we are ready for the Entrepreneurship Panel. We have the pleasure of inviting Richard Chen as the moderator today. Richard is a serial entrepreneur and seasoned veteran in the technology industry with a global footprint. Since founding Iron Fire Ventures in 2013, Richard has invested in over 70 early-stage companies. Richard received his bachelor and MBA degree from UC Berkeley. A double bear. Richard, please, the show is all yours.
All right. So let me get going. And I assume everyone else is on. Let me double check. So welcome to the Entrepreneurship Panel. Am I on my video?
We can hear you, but we cannot see. Oh, now we can see you.
All right.
And there you go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Entrepreneurship Panel. I'm your moderator, Richard Chen. Joining us today with three distinguished alum, Jack McCauley, Kevin Chou, and Eric Yang. They're successful entrepreneurs, business leaders, and big supporter of Berkeley. Jack McCauley has always been a builder, from building the first hardware at Guitar Hero to now building electric cars. Jack is the co-founder of Oculus VR, and innovator in residence at Jacobs Institute of Design Innovation. He's also a generous donor to Berkeley and serves on the board of trustee at UC Berkeley. Eric Yang is the CEO and chairman of Our Game. He took the company public in 2014 and has expanded from its traditional Chinese cards and board games to a global entertainment conglomerate. Prior to Our Game, Eric also held multiple senior executive positions with IBM in the US and Asia. Kevin Chou is an entrepreneur at heart. He has founded several companies in the gaming and blockchain space. He's the CEO of Rally, founder of Gen G Esports, Forte, and spent 10 years building Kabam from the start to a 400 million annual revenue company. Kevin and his wife Connie are also well known as a generous donor to Berkeley, and Kevin serves on the board of trustees at UC Berkeley. Today, we're going to discuss how the pandemic has impacted entrepreneurs. The pandemic changed all of our lives, the way we travel, study, and work. It's a challenge for everyone, but it can be an opportunity for entrepreneurs. Let's start our discussion looking at what are the headwinds and tailwinds entrepreneurs are facing. Let's start with Kevin.
Hi, glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I think obviously this pandemic has created a number of different headwinds and tailwinds, and it really depends on what type of industry one is in. I think the blockchain and gaming industries, which I'm involved in, have both been on the beneficiary side of of this pandemic. I think when people are indoors and looking for things to do, the gaming industry has done very well with that. So that we've seen a gaming industry both in terms of play of games, also the industry that I'm more involved in these days with esports. The esports industry has really taken off in terms of minutes viewed and engagement and the monetization aspect. Partly because there's no other sport, there hasn't been any other sports to watch for the first part of this year. The tailwinds, of course, are just as with any other company, the ability to coordinate and having to rethink all of the processes as well as the culture of a company and all the communication channels of a company. These are all the things that are being rethought, in real time. So I think obviously we're all used to Zoom at this point, but the number of beyond just the straightforward face-to-face interactions and dialogue. How do decisions get made? How do teams get on the same page of a complicated project? these are all the things that I think we're all still trying to figure out, in our industries, even though we've had some benefits from this pandemic. So I think these are, some of the headwinds and tailwinds from my perspective.
Great, thank you, Kevin. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I think we have similar situations as Kevin's. We are in similar industries. For our game, it's in China. It's online games. We are beneficiary of the whole pandemic situation because the lockdown, everyone's is inside their homes, and in terms of usage time, engagement, and in terms of all our measurements and DAUs, MAUs have shot up very significantly, particularly in the first quarter of the year. Even though when the situation stabilized in China, the number come down a little bit, but it's still a lot higher than before the pandemic. So I think anything online, anything that is kind of virtual, kind of benefited from the situation to some extent. But our U.S. operation is a separate LISCO, LI Esports, is on esports. We both have online and offline operations. So on the online side of the business, we see similar benefits. But on the offline, in which we operate real live physical arenas like in Las Vegas, and anything that's physical, anything that's offline is very difficult. Firstly, it's shut down, then it's reopened partially. But even if it's reopened, doesn't mean the user will come back. Right? So in Vegas, for example, is reopened at the moment, but the user are not quite there. And we think that the user will never reach the level that a pre-pandemic for a long time. So I think the tailwind is, I think being in the online industry, we're fortunate. Right? It's really how to capture that massive migration or rediscovery of onlineness or connectedness, and continue to discover business opportunities on that. In terms of the headwinds, is how to move and rethink and re-strategize all our offline businesses and move it online, right? How to make it equally authentic, how to make it equally engaging for all we used to do offline and now make it online. If we don't do that, I think offline business for many line of business are extremely challenging, or we never recover.
I see. Jack, if you can unmute, can you share with us what are your thoughts on the headwinds and tailwinds entrepreneurs are facing?
Sure, thank you. It's an honor to be here, by the way. A lot of distinguished people on the panel. Eric, Kevin, and so forth, everyone here. Here's my take on this question from the boots on the ground perspective. The problem most startups have is finding qualified and talented people to do the work. That's the problem. If you want to do a startup, let's say in gaming, what is your draw to bring people in who work very stable jobs at Activision, Electronic Arts, Konami, Namco, Microsoft, to come to a startup when they're got security and high pay, and to come into your startup and do work. And so often not, it's hard to recruit those people. So you have to go into the broader community to recruit. The problem that I've run into before is finding people with the skill set that is required to do the work. That's the first thing that I run into. The second thing is just the funding. To run a startup company, it takes a good CEO who's connected. In the case of Oculus, we had that. We had a great CEO, Brendan Uribe, who was very connected to venture capital people. He had money himself and funding himself, and he was a great people person. So those are the elements that you need. A CEO of a startup doesn't necessarily have to be a technical person. He has to carry the vision. Now, I know that Elon Musk calls himself the CTO. I don't know that his technical abilities are, on par with the, space scientist type or physicist, but he is, after all, the sort of the P.T. Barnum or the sales guy, the front end of Tesla and SpaceX. It takes a person of that caliber to carry it through. And so when I get recruited by a startup, I don't work anymore. I'm not going to another startup for the rest of my life, I hope. I take a look at that person who's at the top and see what his background is. Also, in terms of the Activision acquisition of Red Octane, I looked at the product and the quality of the personnel. Unfortunately, we had actually at Oculus and Red Octane, we had good quality people there. But I've been in situations where, they just can't get qualified people in there. It's also having the chief being able to convince investors to invest. And when you're a hardware startup, it's hard to get investors. It really is, because it's so expensive and so risky. I mean, the worst case scenario for a software startup is that it implodes or the idea is bad, but the capital investment isn't as high. In the case of Oculus, we had to take money out of our own pocket to pay for mass production. We didn't have any. Initially, we didn't have any investors. It was all the people that founded the company. So those are the things that I see from my seat. Now, a COO or a Chief Financial has a different view of this, but from an engineering perspective, that's the things that I struggled with at some of the companies that I worked at and founded. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I'd like to double click on the challenges that you all mentioned here. What would be the changes from public policy to general entrepreneur ecosystem, or the VCs that supports them, or the supply chain? What would be needed to support entrepreneurs post lockdown to face the challenges that you mentioned?
If I may chime in,
please,
Richard. What has been enumerated by this COVID lockdown? First of all, I'll just back up a little bit. I have a lot of friends in China. I worked there for a long, long time. When this thing broke out, I was on the phone trying to find out if everyone's okay. And what I found were people in fear, primarily afraid, because the Chinese knew about what we knew about it. You didn't know what was going to happen. And so the most extreme and conservative things were implemented. And now things in China are kind of back to normal almost. This is what I'm told. I haven't been back there in a long time. So, and things are going well. So the similar pattern is probably going to roll out here, where we find out this thing isn't as bad as we thought it was. The death rate isn't that high. And a lot of it's just driven by being afraid. And so, but the good part that's coming out of this is that we can now work remotely. I can recruit the best engineer who wants to live in Indiana. He doesn't want to live in California. It's expensive, so on and so forth. His family's there. I can recruit that guy, and he's productive with the tool sets that we're using now. Now, I have my criticisms of Zoom, but it has shined a light on this, that you don't need to work in an office. A lot of companies are taking a really bold look at this and say, wait a minute, I could get the staff I need in Texas, Indiana, Ohio, China, Japan, wherever they want, and recruit these people to come to work. And there is no real big hit in productivity. One area, though, which is a lab with equipment and so forth, in a hardware lab, is it's a different animal. But for general software and IT stuff, it can pretty much work remotely. It's been proven now. So that's it.
What about you, Eric?
From what I've seen, it really depends on industry. From my industry, I think it's fine. In fact, our office in the U.S. headquarters in Southern California has been reopened legally. It's allowed to reopen since June, but we chose not to. Right? What we have discovered is our productivity is in fact higher by working from home and remotely. And we start work there at 8 o'clock and it doesn't end. So we save all the commute time, and there's no one got any excuses not being able to make a meeting. And with the tools like Zoom or Team and other tools that we use, we don't see a productivity loss. The interesting question is, do we ever want to get back to the previous mode of working, right? So we just leased a brand new office space in November of last year. We got a 5-year lease, and now we might not want to keep that lease because we don't need that much space. So for softwares, for ITs, for online, for gaming, I think it's opportunity to rethink what's the optimal way to work. Given that we have the experience and the opportunity to experiment in a very big way in the past few months. That also extends cooperation globally, like China and the US have been worked remotely. Before, there are instances we think that we have to have face-to-face meetings. But now we think that we still need that, but to a much lesser extent. So I really think that it's for certain industries is really about time to redefine and rethink how we work going forward. And I'm not sure how public policy we figure into all this in helping entrepreneurs. I always believe entrepreneurs are, we are always on our own, right? So we make things happen. It's not relying on public policy. So if they are more open, or in terms of providing funding or providing financing, I think that'd be great. I've never seen that happen before. So I'm not sure it'll be different this time. So entrepreneur, we are on our own. So we just have to focus on our products, our services, and our customers. And hopefully our stuff are good enough. So at the end, we not only survive, but excel.
Thank you, Eric. Kevin, do you agree that entrepreneurs were on our own, or are there other forces that could help us? Whether it's like public policy or, in general, a broader ecosystem that play that can help the whole industry.
Well, I think, depending on what stage a startup is in meaning that the earlier a startup is in its life cycle, I think the more important it is to not be dependent, to remove any dependencies that you have on things that you cannot control. So by definition, relying on public policy for anything that's critical to what you need to do as a startup is putting your fate in somebody else's hands, and especially if you're depending on a federal government or something else that could be very slow moving. It's rarely a good idea unless your startup is specifically trying to tackle things in government. So I think echoing what Eric was saying, I think we Rally as a company that we think we've always had a remote first policy, but we have sort of, partly because I'm in San Francisco and so my co-founding team and teams of engineers that I've worked with before in the Bay Area, we have kind of this sort of a nucleus in San Francisco. And it's actually been a challenge for us in the last 12 to 18 months in terms of prior to COVID, in terms of everyone who's working. We have a number of engineers in Oregon and Brazil and Malta and Korea. And it's always been sort of this view that, there's a small sort of group of insiders that are in San Francisco, and then there's the rest of the remote workforce. And we had to work really hard to figure out how to, try to make sure that we include the rest of the organization. But there was always a little bit of a view that there was, this kind of, you wanted to be in San Francisco. So I think one of the nice things is that there's, everyone's remote, including all the people in San Francisco. Now, I will say that, where we are dependent on a little bit of public policy, for example, is that we did have, once a quarter, we did try to facilitate face-to-face, meetings. Certainly once a year, kind of a bigger, type of event where we try to get everyone together. Obviously, that's a big challenge. I think one of our bigger challenges, especially, is that when we try to get people from China and Korea to the U.S., it's harder to get visas, for example. So that's a very large pain, today. And I think there's good reasons why that's happening in terms of trying to obviously stop travel and the spread of the pandemic. But I hope that some of the geopolitical things that we're facing right now are things that we can figure out how to work through. So I just think the world's more and more interconnected, and we need to find talented people all over the world to who are really passionate about building a certain startup. And I hope we can get back to the point where we don't have to think, oh, this person is in a country that's going to be hard to have a face-to-face meeting with, and we're going to deal with travel restrictions and other things. And I hope that we, have a little bit more discourse in that. But in general, I think we're, as a startup, we just think if we, how do we avoid having to be dependent on public policy, and of course, try to be good citizens in terms of shaping that policy, but to make sure that we have our own destiny in our own hands first and foremost as a startup.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. I guess let's delve a little bit deeper into the experience. I think a lot of audience, they're entrepreneurs. They will be curious about what operational changes you have made. For example, cost cutting. Where do you cut your cost? Do you change your supply chain, distribution channels that you have made in your company or companies that you advise to cope with the current COVID situation? Eric, you run a public company. It'll be interesting from your perspective. Any the restrictions that you have to do or that you make changes to your operations?
I think on our Chinese listco, I think it's fine. It's purely online, and China more or less has the situation under control a few months ago now. So I think more or less back to normal, and in fact, we're beneficiary of the situation. I think on the U.S. listco, what we have done is we make several calls early on, sort of point of views. It's really about on two levels. One is kind of technical, right? For example, everyone remote, so we had to figure out what tools to use, what's the new protocol, how to make sure people are home but they're still working, they can be fun. So the whole layer of that technical responses. But also we're trying to think strategically. We're trying to make calls, really, looking down the road. One of the calls we made pretty early on is we think that all things offline is going to be difficult. Difficult meaning it's not going to come back in. So we made this call as early as February. It's not going to come back in 3 months. It might be a lot longer. We don't know how long. Our partners that's in the offline business, like commercial malls in the US, which we open our venues, we think that they will face some difficulties too. So it could be a year, it could be two. When we say strategically, it's really about we're trying to figure out user behavior, right? Even though the pandemic will be over, but user behavior might change forever. You never return to what it was before. So we cut down very drastically on our offline operation. Even though we could reopen, we don't. We think that we have to figure out a new way of delivering entertainment, delivering competition, delivering content to our users, mostly online. There used to be a lot of obstacles or skepticism of, authentic content, authentic competition, authentic entertainment have to be face-to-face, right? So players, they think that, if they're professional, they're really good, they have to be face-to-face competition. Otherwise, it seems to be a lesser event if it's purely online. We had to work through that. And now I think that we have gone through that phase. Firstly, people don't have any choices because everything's shut down. They have to go online. But after they have done a few events with us, the actually is quite good. So I think we make the calls is we believe user behavior on how to receive content, how to engage entertainment, we move online in a pretty significant way. And we have cut down, we have trimmed our offline operation very drastically and move most of what we do online. And we don't think we're going to return. We don't think we're going to ever return back to what it was. Now, whether that call is correct or not, it remains to be seen. Only time will tell. But that's where we are going. So it doesn't matter how difficult it is. We are moving very decidedly online everything, delivering content because we figure it out. That's what we're doing now. Seems to be working so far. So.
Thanks, Eric. Jack, Kevin, do you guys have any other things you would like to share about operational changes, cost cutting, or changing your supply chain distribution channels, things like that you want to share?
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit. I think back in the March timeframe, when we were starting to do our projections for we had just obviously created our projections coming into the year, but then we were forced to relook at everything. And I think what we did then, which I still feel very good about, is that we said to ourselves, we're going to make sure that we do some cost cutting and get to a point where we have at least 24 months of runway in the bank. Um, and so, I think that was a really good, really healthy exercise to go through that. And I think, obviously the business has done. I think most businesses have probably done a little bit better than what people thought back in the March timeframe. But I think using that time to really say, okay, what can we tighten our belts on? I think there was a level of seriousness that everyone approached the exercise with. That this was okay. This isn't just we're in a global pandemic. Let's really get focused on cutting costs. And I think a lot of the noise around such exercises that can happen was a lot less, and everyone was very focused on trying to cut as deep as possible to make sure that we can all do our part to make sure that we have plenty of runway no matter what happens. And so I think that was a very healthy exercise, and I think that very strong companies that had good that were used the time to because the reality is, for a lot of startups, you're afraid of doing layoffs, you're afraid of doing cost cutting because of what the public perception of it is, right? It's hard to recruit. We spent some time in the earlier part of the session talking about how important it is to recruit talent into any organization. Well, it's really hard when you do a layoff, right? But when everyone's doing a layoff, it was a great time to just say, look, let's really use this time to make sure we take care of whether it's a lower performer, whether it's an initiative that's not quite working out yet. Let's take a hard look at all the things across the business and just make sure we tighten it all up. And I'm pretty glad that we did that across the companies that I'm involved in.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Jack.
Thank you. I'm retired, so I don't have a company anymore. But I was just thinking in terms of where I work at the university. I'm actually a volunteer there. So, there's a lot of things. Let's say you have a student body of 50,000 students, right? And you find out that history and English and Mandarin and Spanish and language courses and so forth can be taught entirely offline. Engineering, a little bit more challenging because of labs and so forth. But you find this out. Like Calculus 1 can be taught offline. The biggest roadblock is cheating, actually, if you're on exams and so forth. You're not physically there to take an exam. It's challenging to find out someone is actually to be truthful about the results. So I would say, though, that if you're a university strapped for cash and you have the opportunity to get 50,000, increase your student body by 100% and solve your cash problem, that it's worthwhile exploring that as an alternative. This gets into a gray area, though, with student visas and so forth, which is kind of a problem right now. But I would maintain that if you have a brand like MIT and you want to maintain your brand and provide quality education, you could probably do that offline and increase your student body. Now, I don't think MIT's in the same position as UC Berkeley as far as finances go, but using that as an example. But I think that you could actually increase the number of enrollees. Half the students at UC Berkeley don't pay tuition. We tend to take people like I used to be, who are from the lower end of the economic order, and give them a good quality education and get them. The best way out of poverty actually is to get an education. I'm in the position of saying I think we should continue doing those kinds of things, but we have to solve the cash flow. Why not increase the number of students that can enroll. And now we have a great tool set for doing that here. Doing instruction by Zoom is really difficult, though. I'm trying to figure this out because I have a lot of whiteboard stuff going on, and then you have to switch between desktop and then back to the camera. It's really weird. So that's from my perspective. Now, if I were still doing that kind of work, which I used to do, I would be pulling my hair out right now with the tariffs and so forth that have been implemented. It really hurts your bottom line. I would find any means necessary to avoid paying those. In fact, your cost of goods have risen. You're not in a competitive position with stuff being made in other parts of the world because all of a sudden stuff coming out of China is much more expensive. And honestly, it was kind of headed that way anyways when I was working. The labor rates had gone up. The standard of living in China has gone up substantially from when I started going there. It's amazing. You could say what you want about politics, but for the people of China, it's been a really good deal. However, if you're trying to make widgets and sell them for close to nothing, you're in a tough spot because it went from 35 cents an hour to $2.40 an hour, which is more expensive than other countries, Latin American countries in particular. It's higher cost now to do that. So tariffs are not. At this point, I would be faced with issues with just the cost, getting the cost out of things. So that's my take on it.
Great. I saw some really good questions from the audience. I would like to take one question in particular. It's a good segue into other questions we have. The question is the timing important to launch a startup? What would you suggest entrepreneurs to do to avoid launching a new business in a time like the pandemic and wait for a better time, or should we do it now?
Well, I'll take that. Whether you wait and do it now or later, I think this pandemic thing is going to be over with quickly. There's already a vaccine in the works. Who knows how that's going to work? The facts and the data will come out about the rates of infection, the rate of death, and so forth, and we'll realize at some point the thing isn't as serious as we thought it was. I hope that that's the case. In which case, businesses and schools will be opening soon, and people will get back to a normal way of life. The fallout from this, however, is yet to be seen. These small mom and pop shops, operations, and so forth, they ain't going to make it. They're on shoestrings. Their margins are very slim. A restaurant, tire store, independent tire store, independent gas station, they're just running on fumes, really, anyways. So now they're stressed. What will happen to the economy when we open back up and those places are, they're not solvent any longer? I don't know. I don't have any data to back that up. It's just my gut. So I would do it now rather than wait for that. If I were trying to get funding, I'd do it right away. People realize this thing is a temporary thing. We're not going to be running. We're going to be wearing masks for the next 5 years, and so if I had a really good idea, I would be pursuing funding right now. I don't know the state of VCs and what kind of a pool of capital they have to invest. I really don't know that right now, but I wouldn't wait. I mean, why? If you have a good idea, it may be extinct in 6 months. Somebody might come along with a better idea, And I would just, if you have something that's hot, I would do it right away. That's what I would do.
Jack's vote is do it now. What about Kevin or Eric?
Yeah, I think do it now. I very much do it now. I think I think Jack did a great job of covering it. I think the only other thing I'll add is that the funding market is open. We have a good network of VCs and so forth, and deals are definitely happening. And there's a lot of capital sitting on the sideline. I think what VCs will say themselves is that it's a little bit harder to, when the pandemic first happened, it was a little bit harder to feel comfortable to get all the partners to say yes and write that check if you've never met the team, in person. So there's certainly some of that happening in the in the U.S. I don't know about the China timeline, but in the U.S. in the April, May, June timelines, VCs were still looking at deals, but a little bit more gun shy. Not so much because of economic reasons, but actually because of, can I trust this team that I've never met to write a 5, 10, 20 million, $25 million check into this team. Now, what's happening now, though, is that I think VCs in Silicon Valley and in technology circles, at least, realize that this is the new normal. We're not going to wait until we're doing face-to-face meetings. We have to figure out how to get comfortable, and yes, they're spending more time doing due diligence. They're spending more time on references. They're spending more time on understanding how a team is thinking about the risks and opportunities of a business plan. But they're still, they're actively doing deals. So I think now is a very good time to get started.
I will echo both Kevin and Greg. I think there's never a good time not to start a company if you're going to have a good idea. I have heard this question asked different ways, different times before, right? It's now a good time to start to start a company because it's a bull market, or it's a bear market, or Tencent's buying up all the startups, or Cisco is buying all the network startups. So we start thinking about timing the market, timing an event. That's probably not it's just distraction, to say the least. Right? So for startups, focus on the product, focus on the services, focus on the end users, and regardless of it's bear market, bull market, or pandemic, there's always be funding, there's always be investors, but they always go to the good companies. So just focus on being the good company. So if you think a good idea, start now. Don't wait. There's never a better time, and there's never a worse time. You got the idea, just get started.
Absolutely. There's no good time, no bad time. If you have a great idea, you have you have the passion, you have the conviction. Do it. All right. We have quite a few more questions in, because how much more time do we have?
Richard, you have until 8:15.
So I have 7 minutes. Perfect.
Yeah.
I would like to address one other question here as well. I see there are a lot of great questions from the audience. Thank you very much. This one is also delving into a topic that we talked about, but like a little bit more focused. The question is, it seems like COVID has put a premium on agility, flexibility. What was a major change you made in your operation to inject more agility? So focusing on the agility and flexibility. Anything you did that makes your operation, your company, becomes more agile? I guess besides like using Zoom.
Maybe I can try to just to answer that to start with. I think one of the things that the whole COVID situation forced us to do is put a much sharper focus on operational metrics and operational excellence. What we used to do on esports, we do a lot of events and content creation. We did not do financials or standalone P&Ls on an event basis. We believe, we're building the brand. So if it doesn't make money on this event, that's okay. We could build a brand, so we can do it the next. So we make it back the next time around. Right. But with COVID, with the higher pressure on the financials, on cost cutting, we are forcing our team to really focus on operational excellence. So not doing the P&L is not acceptable. Not getting really good user data is not acceptable. So there's no this builds brand, but period, and there's nothing more after that. That's not acceptable. So we are really putting our team to really focus on the user, focus on the data, focus on the return on event by event basis, project by project basis, and I think that that works out. I think that works out well. And after a while, everyone get into the rhythm, and I think that becomes sort of standard model operation for us now. I think that I think going forward, it's the sharper focus. I think for some startups in tech, is the sharper focus is really we need to run it like we run it like a smaller business instead of a larger business. Remember when we first started our startups, if all we do is single project, right? Every number is in my head. I know every penny. But when you get to 1,000 person, I don't know all the details anymore. We kind of lose in the larger enterprises. And now in the past few months, we're kind of returning back to the roots and say, well, we have to run our startup again. But many startups inside our enterprises. I think it's a good thing.
That's great. Measuring your agility and keep it everyone like doing their best, like with their responsibility accountable for that. That's great. Thank you, Eric. Kevin, Jack, do you guys have anything else you want to add?
I can go. I think I'll touch on another area, which is hiring. I think when we had in-person meetings, it actually in-person hiring, it actually slowed things down. We had to make sure that the candidate could come into the office, right? And then that day that they had the schedule in the office was I could work for a large number of people that can then interview them too. And then even, let's say somebody was available to interview the candidate, but doesn't necessarily absolutely have to interview the candidate. We just say, oh yeah, why don't you interview the candidate too? He or she is going to be in the office that day. And so, hiring processes, I think we, just naturally have always been one of the things that I've disliked in terms of how they, it's sort of I don't know. There's a way of doing it that's, as far as I can tell, informal, and there's no rules, but everyone still agrees on what the rules are. There's like a set way of doing it that I've seen across a lot of different companies. And so I think, having to move to Zoom has really made us think through exactly what we want the hiring process to be, who's interviewing them, and then we break it up more. You don't have to have a candidate come for 4 hours and then have person A, then B, then C, and then D, like all go through and do the interview. You can break that up into a 2 or 3 day affair, with just 1 hour each whenever it works. And so I think we have become more agile in terms of how we recruit and hire, and making those decisions, both the scheduling, the people involved, who's making what decision, and so from start to finish, a faster process. I think that's been a really nice area of agility for us as we move to a virtual hiring process.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Last question. Let's take an elevation up, step back, looking at the macro environment that's happening. Besides COVID, the stock market volatility, the U.S.-China tension that we're in, how does it impact your business?
I think it's very challenging. So I'll talk about our esports business, Gen G. We had announced I spent 2 years doing a deal with the NBA to own the Shanghai franchise for the NBA 2K esport. A couple months after we announced, the pandemic broke out, and then more geopolitical tension. And so, I'm personally a little bit sad. I think, my last company that I started, Kabam, we had a 1,200 person, workforce with 300 of them, in China. And so it's China has always been a really important, both a market where there's a lot of expertise and skill, and of course, from a consumer, end market standpoint, a phenomenal market. And I think, sadly, I think at least the near-term momentum is for for U.S. and China to drift apart and for it to be harder to do business. Right? I personally look at what's happening with some of the the way that the two countries and the companies that operate in these two countries can and cannot do business. Especially some of the things that are in the headlines right now, and I think it's a little sad. So. And it is what it is. And as I said earlier, I think there's no use crying over spilled milk or wishing that something was a little bit different. And so, we certainly have just made more and more plans to make sure that we can not be dependent on, really take as much of the geopolitical risk out of our business as possible. And I think there's no other way to run a startup, because I think that level of risk, it's massive risk, and it's completely unpredictable, and there's no mitigation for it. And so it's and I think it's an unfortunate state of affairs, but it's necessary for startups to pursue at this point.
Jack, I know that you serve on the board of Asia Society. I'm sure you got this question quite a lot. Can you share some insights here?
Thanks. Well, I'll tell you my own experience, and I'll go back to when I first started working there. I hear this. Kevin mentioned his staff in China. The U.S. is faced with an education problem right now. When I was working there 20 years ago, the capabilities of the Chinese engineers was not high. In 20 years, things changed very, very much, and the capability and the skill level of the Chinese engineers is pretty much on par with the U.S. engineers. If you are faced with a competitor who is competing you with, first of all, we can't compete with China with manufacturing. The supply chain is gone. It's not coming back to the United States ever. I mean, it's never not going to come back here. Whether it'll stay in China, I'm not sure. They're going to move somewhere else. If we don't have preparing our workforce here in the United States for a competitor, we'll end up with a similar situation we had with manufacturing, where it's gone. And so I think focusing on China is not going to change. They're not going to alter their path or course they're on. All they have to do is wait 4 years, and there's a different course to follow here. So I don't see that as bearing fruit. I will comment on the cultural differences, which is my own based on my own experience working there. You can't go in and bludgeon people. It doesn't work. I've tried it. It didn't work. You have to go in and treat people the same way you would treat them anywhere. And I don't think that's going to work either. Our policy, it's not worked very well. It's not convinced the Chinese to change. What will? I don't think we can convince them to change. I don't think that's going to happen. We have to focus on what we're doing internally, and that is providing the California's education system is number 48. We're next to Mississippi in quality of education. And how did that happen? Well, that's what we should be looking at, right? That's my take on it.
All right. Thank you, Jack. Eric, do you have any other comments you would like to make?
I think the situation is incredibly frustrating. It's not about the relationship going left or going right. It's about uncertainty, right? Because it seems to be changing by the day or by the week. And for companies, it's extremely difficult to plan ahead. And it depends on the stage the company is in. For example, we have invested companies that are in a very advanced stage of doing an IPO in the US market, it's China-based. And is that when the time comes, in the next few months, as windows still open, or whether the rules going to change, no one knows. There's no way to mitigate that. And they have worked so hard and so long with the best investment bank lineup and investor liking them, but it might not happen because of the other policy change, the uncertainties. So there's no good way to mitigating that. Right? So for late stage companies, startups, and they're like pre-IPO, just to tough it out and just don't know what's going to happen. And that's incredibly frustrating. For early stage startups, then what we have been advising our investor company to do is just ignore the whole thing. Right? Try not to look at the crystal ball because I don't think it's possible to do. It's so difficult. Just focus on your things you could control. So again, I think I've talked about it a couple of times. It's your product, your services, your customers. Try not to time the market. Try not to guess the policy. It's pretty futile. For early stage company, focus on your own thing. Focus on the things you can control, and hopefully things will settle down. Right, turn left or turn right. I think what we're asking for is to have clarity. Right, then we know what to do. Right now, I think the biggest challenge is uncertainty and lack of clarity. So for early stage companies, we just advise them to focus on their own things we can control. And when you have a good product, you have a good company, there's always a good outcome somehow. Try not to just ignore the whole thing for the moment.
Thank you, guys. I guess last comment here would be, if you're an entrepreneur, just ignore all the negativity around you. Focus on what you want to do. I'll quote Steve Jobs: "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It's all right. Thank you very much, guys, and thank you for having us on this panel. I really appreciate all three of our speakers giving us great insights and authentic insights. Thank you. I don't know how to do a round of applause, but this is what I do. Thank you.
We can do it virtually like this.
Virtually, yes.
All of us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and all the panelists for such a wonderful discussion. To all the entrepreneurs out there, you got the magic word from the panel. Do it now. All right, audience. If you have more questions, there will be a 15-minute networking session with the panel shortly. Again, please look for the link to the virtual networking room in the YouTube and Baidu chat box, as well as in your handbook.